1986, Stephen King took pen to paper and wrote the monster horror novel That Was It, a 1,138-page novel that went on to become one of his all-time most popular. The novel has, of course, experienced recent reignited popularity with the release of a new blockbuster film adaptation. However, before Bill Skarsgård wreaked havoc as a red-nosed entity, it was Tim Curry who first donned the white face paint, terrorizing the children of Derry. It was in the 1990 American miniseries directed by Tommy Lee Wallace and adapted by Lawrence D. Cohen that King's fans first were able to see Pennywise the Dancing Clown, although broadcasted on television and not through theater. For those that aren't familiar, Tommy Lee Wallace is also credited for directing Halloween 3 Season of the Witch, otherwise known as the only Halloween film not to feature Michael Myers. The miniseries certainly left an impression, but did the miniseries actually have the goods to do justice to the source material, or was the director of the new adaptation right in saying it was a cute film that otherwise lacked? Eavesdroppers, welcome to the Mix and Mash podcast. My name is McConaughey, here alongside Beccah Grace, and for this video we'll be sharing our thoughts on the first half of the 1990 Stephen King's It miniseries, this being the half that focused on the children. And if you enjoy our opinion and what we have to say, you can continue on with part 2 of our discussion when we share our thoughts on the second half. And also, not only that, but we'll be sharing our thoughts on the new It film from 2017.
That said, for those who don't know, I'll try and keep it short. In the first half of the It miniseries, the story focuses around a group of children in Derry, Maine, as many disappearances begin to make headlines. This includes Bill's younger brother Georgie, who is himself murdered during his encounter with a strange entity who introduces himself as Pennywise the Dancing Clown. Soon, the 7 children, who later identify themselves as the Losers Club, band together in an effort to try and kill the evil clown before he kills them.
With that being said, first and foremost, what were your initial thoughts on this? What was your interest going into it? You hadn't seen the It miniseries prior to this. You had seen the movie, but you hadn't seen the miniseries. What were your expectations?
Well, I was hoping that it would be at least partially as good as the It one that I saw. I was hoping to be at least a little creeped out, maybe even some scares.
But going in, did you think it would be good? Did you honestly think it would be good?
I had heard that it was good from some people, but other people said it was bad. So I was trepidatious. I was hoping it would be better than I heard.
It's funny because whenever I was younger, if I'm honest with myself, a lot of people have this debate about whether or not they should show kids horror movies. I was not involved in this debate. My parents were pretty lenient when it came to that. I can remember watching the second Hostel movie, or actually the first Hostel movie. I remember watching it whenever it first came out, and that was in 2006. And that movie involved people being tortured, ripped apart. That was whenever I was, I think, 11, maybe even younger than that, maybe. But regardless, I was never really cut off from that. And it was fine, because whenever I was younger, I absolutely loved A Nightmare on Elm Street. I thought the series was fantastic. They meant a lot to my childhood. However, there was only a couple movies that ever actually scared me. And for some reason, it was the It miniseries. And in particular, I can mention the exact scenes that scared me. The scene where it involves the kids looking in through that photo album, and the pictures start to move. For some reason, that scared the hell out of me when I was a kid, just the way it did that. And looking back at it now, I question myself, but at the time, I remembered it fondly. And another thing is, whenever I was younger, I always remembered it as being really, really, really long. Like, the series together, not just the first half of the miniseries, which is what we're discussing right now. But I always remembered telling my friends that we would have to set aside an entire day in order to watch it, when in reality, it's only about 3 hours. But I always thought it was way longer than that.
And I can understand that. And I would say, after watching it, I'd say it was probably a good first scary movie for kids because of the lower rating, since I think it was PG.
It was for television, so there's a lot of things they couldn't get away with.
So, it was a lot calmer than, especially today's big horror films. I mean, there wasn't much blood, and what there was, it wasn't as traumatic as, the movie scenes we see today. We saw some stabbings, but never actually saw the scenes of that. So I'd say I would call this baby's first horror show. And, I probably would have been more scared as a child, considering the very first scary movie that I ever saw was The Ring. And I thought that shit was the scariest thing I had ever saw. Watching it as an adult, it's like, aw.
I think that you, yourself, and a lot of people have expectations or perceptions about this film that I don't necessarily agree with. Like you said, you hope that it would be good. You've heard things. Some people praised it. Some people disliked it. I think that I'm somewhere squarely in the middle when it comes into it. Because I recognize the amount of flaws that this film has, but I like it a lot more than what other people seem to. And it's the reason that I like it. And let's go first with the characters. The characters, these of course, we're talking about the first half, so this will be the kids. I enjoyed the kids quite a bit. I enjoyed them. Like, they're probably not the best actors. There's some moments that were a little bit jarring. There were a little bit of moments that were very, very sentimental. It felt very Hallmarky almost. I remember at one point, one of the characters puts his palm on his cheek, and it's just like a very, very sentimental moment. It's got some awkward transitions, awkward things, the changes from it. But what do you think about the characters overall of this one?
I actually liked a lot of the characters. I thought that the bully could definitely use a bit more fleshing out, but the characters.
In what way? Do you think he could have been meaner, or do you think that he could have been, or do you think he's kind of just a traditional greaser type?
Yeah, he
bully?
just kind of felt like, we need a bully, so here's the typical bad guy. It didn't really explain why. The closest we got to an explanation for why he was the way he was, I can kind of see some of the development there with the movie scene whenever they dumped their food, especially, what was the little comedian kid's name? I can't remember at this moment, but when he spilled his soda on top of them, then I can see at least some development.
So Seth Green. I was just thinking about the actor's name.
And it was like, yeah, there is some development for those characters, and I really appreciated that, because I think it's important to see the where and the why. And I liked how they went into detail about the kids themselves. I didn't know that the little Jewish boy, Stan, I didn't know he was a scout, but it really fit his character. I mean, it kind of encompassed all of his character, but it seemed to fit the kid he was. And I thought that the character of Bill, I liked him a lot. I don't know exactly why, but I really liked him. There was just something that gelled with me about Bill. He seemed to be the leader in both types, and you could feel his pain for his brother, and you can feel that deep down he felt that his brother's death was his own fault for a long time. And I thought that was a really well told story. And
do you think it was a well told story in general, or do you think that it was captured well in the miniseries itself?
Yeah, I thought it was captured pretty well, because I liked seeing that mental heaviness. And the way that they did that was, to me, really well done. Now, other characters, there were things that struck me as a little weird, something that kids normally wouldn't do. Now, this was in the 1950s, and I don't know if it was normal in the 1950s for a 12-year-old boy to call his dad Daddy. Thought that was weird, which I can't say much. I still call my dad Daddy, but that's a little weird for some people because I'm 24, and I'm also a girl, so that's less weird for people. So I don't know how it was back then, but it seemed a little odd. I don't think I've ever seen a 12-year-old boy call his dad Daddy.
I think that the dialogue in this definitely could have used some sprucing up. I think that it could have come off a little bit more natural as far as the acting is concerned. One thing that always stuck out to me about this film, and I think that it's one of the reasons why I say that although I recognize the problems with it, I like it quite a bit more than what other people might. I recognize there's a lot of problems with it, and I do mean a lot of problems with it. But one thing I liked in particular is I liked the way that they had a established camaraderie between them as friends. Something that it's always mentioned with Stephen King. It's something that he captures very, very well, especially whenever he is writing something about children, aside from the fact of, or whenever he gets a little overzealous and tries to make them have orgies.
Ugh.
But generally speaking, like with Stand By Me, how he eventually inspired Stranger Things. There's this, it's that same kind of charm to it. Those kind of them people, the kids hanging out and being friends. And it has a coming of age kind of charm to it, a nostalgic charm that is, it's more of a feeling you get. It's not necessarily what you're seeing on the screen is particularly well written or well portrayed or filmed, but it just pokes and prods at your nostalgic, it pulls at your nostalgic heartstrings. And I think that they captured that pretty well, and I think that they went into it in quite a bit. Like, for instance, they showed them, like, building that dam together.
Mm-hmm.
They showed them just, like, going to the movie theater. They showed them doing this and that. And it allowed them to build a little bit of camaraderie with one another.
And that's something that I really liked, because some movies just go for the, oh, these guys are now friends, and they move on. They do maybe one short scene of how they all met, but they don't really show the growth of the friendship themselves. I actually really enjoyed seeing them do things as kids, because so many films that I've seen, and I've seen a regretfully large amount of really cheesy movies, especially from Disney, for reasons, and I do like cheesy movies, but I will say that the development of their friendship, I thought they did a really good job. And a lot of movies, especially the ones that are rushed out and involve kids these days, don't do that. And I was very happily surprised to find that in a movie that was supposed to be horror bait.
And there's also something to keep in mind. A part of me goes back and forth. Do I credit the film itself for doing it, or do I credit the book for having portrayed it in this way? Because although these moments are, like I said, they have a nostalgic value to me. Not just because it's a film that I saw a long time ago, but because it actually has a commentary on childhood, encountering bullies and having friendships, just being kids, and I enjoy that a lot. And that's the aspect that I think that really is worth noting about this film, the part that I would enjoy the most. The criticism, though, and it's the largest criticism about this film as a whole, the thing that I have a problem with throughout it, is Pennywise. And the thing is, the actor who played Pennywise, his name is Tim Curry. You might have seen him as the voice of Nigel from Eliza Thornberry. And that's probably not his most noteworthy role, but it's the best role. And a lot of people liked him. A lot of people liked his look. Whenever I decided to revisit this film with you, I went into it thinking, yeah, he was good. And I remembered it in my head like he was good. He was a good portrayal of the character. And I thought that I was going to be able to walk through it and say, like, yeah, he was good. He wasn't. He wasn't that good at all. He was... It reminds me almost in some respects of Jack Nicholson whenever he portrayed the Joker in the Batman movies. Because whereas with The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger portrayed the Joker as a very, very unpredictable, unstable type of character that you never really know what they're thinking. I felt like Jack Nicholson's portrayal was not very intimidating. It was basically go out there and be a clown that is also a villain. And I think that, and actually at one point you said that to me whenever you were watching the movie, is that he just comes off, he's just a clown making silly comments and jokes that aren't very funny. And he doesn't have much of an edge. He doesn't have much bite to him. Whenever you see him, he does not command presence. He doesn't have a presence about him where I feel legitimately afraid.
I honestly say he's just not scary. And I can understand chlorophobia, especially with my sister being so afraid of clowns. But looking at him, and I don't know if it's because I saw the newer one first, and the portrayal by Mr. Skarsgård is just so fantastic and so disturbing that when I went to see this one, he just seemed like a clown who made really bad gallows humor jokes. And it almost seemed like every part of him was fake, from his act to his makeup.
A lot of that has to be credited with the time period that it was filmed, and we have to, of course, remember that not only was it released in the 1990s, it was a television movie. So there was pretty much a shoestring budget, and if we're being honest, as someone who watched a lot of movies from the 90s, as far as television movies are concerned, it looked pretty good for that time period and for the limited budget that they had to have had. Especially with some things, like even though we make fun of special effects in the film. It looked about average for that time period and for that amount of a budget. But I think that at the same time, you can't give a film a pass from the time period. If it doesn't stand or it doesn't age well, then it doesn't age well, and you have to recognize the fact that it didn't age well. And the fact is, whenever I watched even the photo album scene that I mentioned that I liked, the photo album scene, it doesn't look very good anymore because it's not very well done anymore. It just looks kind of like they zoomed in the camera on a black and white film screen, and then they had it play out normal, and it doesn't look like that good of a transition. It doesn't come off very, very well. And most of the scenes with Pennywise, they don't come off very well. Like, for instance, and we'll get into it more with the second half of our review when we touch on some of the scenes with Pennywise in the second half, but even in the first half, he is not nearly... The scenes are not executed as well as I think they could be, and they don't bring out the best of the character. I certainly don't feel afraid whenever I see him, and honestly, I watched this movie and thought to myself, this would be better if it were a Stand By Me kind of film, and it didn't have the clown. Which makes me feel bad, because like, that's the entire point of the movie. But it seems like the best moments were just the kids being kids, and then everything else was just kind of shoehorned in it. And even now, whenever we go back and look at it, certain scenes certainly stand out to me as really, really cheesy. They stood out to me probably even then, but like, for instance, whenever that one kid with asthma like points his inhaler at Pennywise and like, battery acid, you slime.
I love that part, even though it was really, really cheesy. I thought that was just hilarious.
I mean, I joked at you that it was my favorite scene in the movie, but it's like, it's a ridiculous... It comes with a certain so bad it's good kind of charm. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is a type of story that can hit higher ground than so bad it's good territory.
And I agree with that. What would your thoughts be overall for the film? Did you enjoy it?
I did, but I didn't. Like, I think that's what I come to, is I enjoy it probably more than what I should. I would say that I like it, but I don't. And my biggest criticism would probably be the portrayal of Pennywise and how not just Tim Curry. Like, I think that Tim Curry had moments in the film, but I think that they didn't bring out the best with him. And so what do you think?
Well, I did enjoy watching it. I wouldn't say it was a terrible movie, and I've definitely seen worse. I agree with you that there were some moments that the acting felt a little Disney-esque and overblown for comedic effect. Like you said, with that hand moment. When we were watching that, I just burst out laughing. It was just so bad, and almost an overdone attempt at drama that just fell flat. For the most part, though, I did enjoy watching it. I don't know if I'd want to watch it again.
I've seen it like soon, 500 times.
But I'd say that so far I prefer the new one. But, you know, it's one of those things where it might just be that's because it's the first one I saw, and my mind is used to the newer budgets because I didn't grow up with the lower budget films. I watched some, but I didn't really get into horror until I got older, into my early 20s. So I don't have that underlying foundation of expectations from effects and things. So the effects and the storytelling elements from that era just come off to me as cheesy. So even though I enjoyed the film, the first part as a whole, I admit that it was a deeply flawed production, seen through the eyes of the 21st century.
With that being said, thank you very much for joining us here on the Mix and Mash podcast. I'm McConaughey, here alongside Beccah Grace, and I hope you will join us in our next video where we discuss the second half of the It miniseries.
Alright, have a good evening, eavesdroppers.